The baby monitor screamed into the silence of the house like an alarm no one was coming to shut off. Evelyn Carter stood frozen at the foot of the stairs, one hand gripping the polished wooden railing, the other shaking around her phone. The mansion around her was immaculate, cream-colored walls, soft lighting, a faint scent of expensive candles, but it felt hollow, like a hotel room no one actually lived in. Upstairs, her 3-month-old son, Noah, cried with a sound that didn't just signal hunger or discomfort. It was thin, strained, wrong. She ran. By the time she reached the nursery, Noah's tiny face was flushed deep red, his skin burning against her chest as she lifted him from the crib. His breathing came in short, uneven bursts. Evelyn pressed her lips to his forehead and felt panic crash through her body. "No, no, no, please," she whispered, already unlocking her phone. She called her husband. Once. Twice. On the third ring, he answered. Music pulsed faintly through the speaker. Laughter, glasses clinking. "Nate," Evelyn said, her voice breaking instantly. "Something's wrong with Noah. He's burning up. He won't stop crying. I think we need to go to the ER." There was a pause, followed by an exhale, annoyed, not concerned. "Evelyn," Nathaniel Brooks said calmly, "I'm at a gala. This is important." "I know, but please," she said, bouncing Noah gently, trying to soothe him. "His temperature is over 103. He's not breathing right." "You're panicking," Nate replied. "You always do this." In the background, a woman laughed. Soft, close, familiar. Evelyn didn't need to ask who it was. "Give him some Tylenol," Nate continued. "It's just a baby being a baby." The words hit harder than a slap. "Just a baby?" Evelyn repeated, stunned. "Nate, he's your son." "I can't deal with this right now," he said. "You're being dramatic. Handle it." Before she could say another word, the call ended. Evelyn stared at the dark screen, her reflection faintly visible. Hair unwashed, eyes hollow, a woman she barely recognized. Upstairs in a mansion worth millions, she was completely alone. Noah whimpered again, weaker this time. That was when fear turned into something colder. She grabbed the diaper bag with one hand, her keys with the other, and wrapped Noah tightly against her chest. As she rushed out into the night, she didn't know that this moment, the moment her husband chose champagne over his child, was the exact second everything in his life began to collapse. Because while Nathaniel Brooks believed he was untouchable, he had just triggered a chain of events he could never undo. And by the time the sun rose, the words, "It's just a baby," would cost him everything. The emergency room doors slid open with a sharp hiss, releasing a wave of cold air that smelled like disinfectant and fear. Evelyn rushed inside. Noah pressed tightly against her chest, his tiny body trembling despite the blanket wrapped around him. Bright fluorescent lights washed over her, too harsh, too unforgiving. The waiting room was half full, an elderly man coughing into a tissue, a teenage girl holding her wrist, a young couple whispering urgently over a stroller. None of them mattered. All Evelyn could hear was Noah's breathing, shallow and uneven, like it might stop at any second. "I need help," she said to the triage nurse, her voice barely steady. "My baby has a high fever. He's not breathing right." The nurse looked up, instantly alert. One glance at Noah's flushed face was enough. "How old?" 3 months. "Temperature?" 103.8. I checked twice." They didn't ask for insurance. They didn't ask for her husband. They took Noah from her arms and moved fast. Evelyn followed, her heart pounding so hard it made her dizzy. Her hands shook as she signed forms she barely read, the pen slipping against the clipboard. Somewhere down the hall, a machine began to beep in a slow, measured rhythm. Every sound felt amplified, every second stretched thin. A doctor appeared, calm, focused, professional. "We're going to run some tests," he said. You did the right thing bringing him in." That sentence almost broke her. She sank into a plastic chair outside the treatment room, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. Her phone buzzed in her hand. For half a second, hope surged. It wasn't Nate. It was a text message. "You embarrassed me tonight," it read. "People noticed I left early. We'll talk about this when I get home." Evelyn stared at the screen, her chest tightening. Not one word about Noah. Not a single question. She typed back with trembling fingers. "He's very sick. The doctors are running tests. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared." No reply. Minutes later, a nurse stepped out. "Mrs. Brooks?" Evelyn jumped to her feet. "His oxygen levels were lower than we like to see," the nurse said gently. "We're stabilizing him now." Lower than we like to see. The words echoed in Evelyn's head as she pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from crying out loud. She nodded, thanked the nurse, and sat back down, her knees weak. That was when it hit her. Not all at once, but slowly, cruelly. If she hadn't trusted Nate, if she hadn't waited, if she had listened to her instincts instead of being told she was dramatic. She looked around the waiting room again. Every other parent had someone with them, a hand to hold, a voice to lean on. She had a mansion. She had a married name. And in this moment, none of it meant anything. Hours later, the doctor returned. "If you'd waited until morning," he said quietly, "this could have gone very differently." Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs as she watched her son sleep under hospital lights, tubes taped gently to his fragile skin. One truth settled deep in her bones. The night Nate chose to walk away was the night she stopped being his wife and became something else entirely. The hospital room was too quiet for a place holding so much fear. Evelyn sat in the stiff vinyl chair beside Noah's crib, her arms wrapped around herself as if that might keep her from breaking apart. Machines hummed softly, lights blinked in steady patterns, and her son finally slept, his chest rising and falling in fragile, measured breaths. A thin tube rested beneath his nose, delivering oxygen he had struggled to take on his own just hours earlier. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt hollow. The doctor's words replayed in her head over and over, refusing to fade. "If you'd waited until morning..." He hadn't needed to finish the sentence. The rest lived vividly in her imagination. A different outcome, a quieter room, a silence that never ended. Evelyn reached out and gently touched Noah's tiny hand. His fingers curled weakly around hers, and something inside her chest cracked open. A sob escaped before she could stop it. She pressed her forehead against the side of the crib and cried without sound, tears sliding down her face and dripping onto her sleeve. This was what her life had come to. She had a husband who dismissed her fear, a child who nearly paid the price, and a voice inside her that kept whispering, "You should have known better." Her phone buzzed again. She didn't want to look. She already knew it wouldn't be the message she needed. Still, habit won. A single text from Nate. "I'll be home late. Don't start a scene." That was it. No, "How is he?" No, "Is our son okay?" No, "I'm sorry." Evelyn stared at the words until the screen blurred, slowly. Something shifted inside her. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. Cold, sharp, unavoidable. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a bad night. This was who Nathaniel Brooks was when things truly mattered. For years, she had explained his behavior away. He was busy. He was ambitious. He was under pressure. She had learned to shrink herself to make room for his ego, to doubt her instincts when he called her emotional, to apologize when she asked for too much. And tonight, she almost apologized for her baby being sick. The realization made her stomach twist. She looked down at Noah again, really looked at him. The faint crease between his brows. The way his lips parted when he breathed. the absolute trust in his small body resting in a world he couldn't understand. "I won't fail you," she whispered, her voice shaking but certain. Not like that. For the first time since becoming a mother, Evelyn allowed herself to think a forbidden thought. What if leaving is safer than staying? The idea terrified her. She had no income, no savings in her name, no proof she could stand on her own. Nate had made sure of that. Every card, every account, every decision ran through him. He had built a cage so elegant it looked like a life of privilege, and she had lived inside it, willingly. As dawn crept through the narrow hospital window, pale and unforgiving, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope. Resolve. Whatever came next would be brutal, unfair, terrifying. But one thing was certain. The woman who had begged her husband to come home was gone, and the mother who stayed awake all night guarding her child was not someone Nathaniel Brooks was prepared to face. Morning came quietly, almost cruel in its normalcy. Sunlight slipped through the narrow hospital window, landing softly on the white sheets and the clear plastic rails of Noah's crib. Evelyn hadn't slept. She sat exactly where she had been all night, her body stiff, her eyes burning, her attention fixed on the steady rise and fall of her son's chest. Every breath he took felt like a victory she refused to look away from. A nurse entered, checked the monitors, and smiled gently. "He's stable," she said. "You did good, Mom." The word Mom settled into Evelyn's chest in a way nothing else had. Her phone vibrated on the chair beside her. This time it was Nate. She hesitated before answering. "Yes," she said quietly. "Where are you?" Nate asked. His voice was sharp, irritated, not worried. "At the hospital," Evelyn replied. "Noah almost stopped breathing last night." There was a pause, not the kind filled with concern, but calculation. "You took him without telling me?" Nate said. "Do you realize how that looks?" Evelyn closed her eyes. "How that looks," she repeated. "Nate, the doctor said if I'd waited—" "I don't want to hear it," he cut in. "Do you have any idea what kind of night I had? People were asking questions. Lila had to smooth things over. There it was, not their son, not the fear, not the possibility of loss. Image. You made me look irresponsible," Nate continued, "like I can't control my own household." Evelyn felt something twist in her chest. Slowly, carefully, she stood up and walked to the window, lowering her voice. "Our baby could have died." "That's dramatic," Nate snapped. "He's fine now, isn't he?" She didn't answer. Nate exhaled loudly. "Listen, I don't want this turning into a thing. The press already watches everything I do. If anyone hears you ran to the ER in the middle of the night crying, acting unstable—" "Unstable?" Evelyn said. "Yes," he said coldly. "Postpartum emotions are real, Evelyn. Judges know that. Lawyers know that." The implication landed like a punch. "If you keep making impulsive decisions," Nate continued, "you could make things very difficult for yourself." Evelyn's hand tightened around her phone. "Are you threatening me?" she asked. "I'm protecting our family," he replied smoothly, "and my company, which, by the way, pays for that hospital bill you're racking up." The call ended before she could respond. Evelyn stood frozen, her heart pounding, the hospital room suddenly too small. For the first time, she understood the true shape of the cage she lived in. This wasn't just neglect, it was control. Nate wasn't afraid she would fail. He was afraid she would think. She returned to Noah's side, brushing her thumb over his soft cheek. Fear crept in, real fear. Not of being alone, but of being crushed quietly, legally, without anyone ever seeing it happen. But beneath that fear, something else began to form. If Nate believed she was weak, emotional, trapped, then he would never see her coming. The hospital discharged Noah just after noon. Evelyn carried him out wrapped in a pale blue blanket, his tiny fingers curled against her chest, his breathing finally even. Relief should have flooded her. Instead, tension sat heavy in her stomach, coiled tight like a warning she couldn't ignore. She buckled him into the car seat with slow care, double-checking every strap, as if precision alone could keep the world from hurting him again. The drive home felt longer than usual. When she pulled into the driveway, the house loomed ahead. White stone, tall windows, manicured hedges. From the outside, it looked like safety. From the inside, she knew better now. It was quiet. Too quiet. Nate wasn't home. Evelyn settled Noah into the crib and watched him sleep, counting his breaths the way she had all night. Once she was sure he was truly resting, she stepped into the hallway and closed the door softly behind her. That was when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Everything in her body told her not to invite more stress into her day. But something, instinct maybe, made her answer. "Hello?" There was a brief pause, then a man's voice, calm and measured. "Evelyn Carter," he said. "I was hoping you'd pick up." Her spine stiffened. No one called her by that name anymore. Not Evelyn Carter, only Evelyn Brooks. "Who is this?" she asked cautiously. "My name is Julian Reed," the voice replied. "You and I worked together once, about 8 years ago. Pacific Crest Consulting." Her breath caught. Memories rushed in. Long nights, financial models, risk projections spread across conference tables. A version of herself that felt like someone else entirely. "I don't understand," she said. "How did you get this number?" "I've kept it," Julian said simply, "in case you ever needed it." Evelyn leaned against the wall, suddenly lightheaded. "Why would I need it now?" Another pause, this one heavier. "Because your husband is about to destroy himself," Julian said. "And he's going to try to take you with him." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "You shouldn't be calling me," she said, lowering her voice instinctively. "Nate monitors—" "I know," Julian interrupted. "That's why I waited until today." Silence stretched between them. Then he asked quietly, "Do you remember the contingency clause you designed for the Halston Bay project?" Evelyn's mind reeled. "That was hypothetical," she said. "They never approved it." "They didn't," Julian agreed. "But Nathaniel Brooks did, 2 years later, when he needed emergency capital." Her knees nearly gave out. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying," Julian replied, "that your husband built his empire on safeguards you were smart enough to design, and arrogant enough to believe you'd forgotten." Evelyn slid down until she was sitting on the floor. Her back against the wall, pulse racing. "I don't have access to anything," she said. "He made sure of that." Julian's voice softened. "That's what he wants you to believe. But paper remembers, Evelyn. And so do people." Tears filled her eyes, not from fear this time, but from something dangerously close to hope. "I can't fight him," she said. "I don't have the strength." "You already proved you do," Julian replied. "You just saved your son's life." He let the words settle before adding, "Meet me tonight. There's something you need to see." The call ended. Evelyn sat there for a long moment, heart pounding, staring at her dark phone screen. For the first time since the ER, she wasn't alone, and somewhere in the distance, the cage she lived in had begun to crack. The cafe Julian chose was small, tucked between 2 quiet buildings downtown, the kind of place people walked past without noticing. No flashy sign, no crowd. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old books, and the noise of the city felt far away. Evelyn arrived 10 minutes early, Noah asleep in his stroller, her nerves stretched tight. Julian Reed was already there. He stood when he saw her, taller than she remembered, his hair now streaked with gray, his presence calm in a way that felt earned. He didn't rush her, didn't overwhelm her. He waited until she sat down, until she took a breath. "You look like you haven't slept," he said gently. "I haven't," Evelyn replied. "Not really. Not in years." Julian nodded, as if that confirmed something. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thin folder, setting it on the table between them. "Before we open this," he said, "I need you to understand something. Nothing in here is speculation. Everything is signed, dated, verified." Evelyn stared at the folder, her pulse thudding in her ears. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said. "After all this time." Julian met her gaze. "Because 8 years ago, a junior analyst named Evelyn Carter saved my firm from a catastrophic investment, and then she disappeared." Her throat tightened. Julian opened the folder. Inside were documents she recognized instantly: models, projections, contingency clauses, her work, her handwriting in the margins, her logic, her voice. "This," Julian said, tapping one page, "is the emergency control clause. You designed it as a last resort safeguard. You told the board it would only be used if leadership became a liability." Evelyn swallowed. "They never approved it." "They didn't," Julian said. "But Nathan Brooks did, quietly, 2 years into your marriage, when his company was about to collapse." He slid another document forward. Nathan's signature stared back at her. Evelyn felt the room tilt. "He used your framework to secure private capital," Julian continued. "He leveraged your safeguards to attract investors. And then he rewrote the narrative. Removed your name. Removed your access. Removed you." Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Every deal Nate bragged about, every milestone, all of it traced back to structures she had built. "He didn't just marry you," Julian said softly. "He extracted you." The words landed with sickening clarity. "That's why he isolated you," Julian went on. "That's why he controlled the accounts. That's why he kept calling you emotional. He needed you to forget who you were." Evelyn closed her eyes, memories rushing back, moments she had dismissed, instincts she had silenced. The woman she used to be wasn't gone. She had been buried. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Julian leaned forward. "It means his power exists because you allowed it, and because you're still legally tied to the foundation of his company." Evelyn looked down at Noah, sleeping peacefully. For the first time, fear gave way to something sharper. "If I move," she said slowly, "he'll come for me." Julian didn't hesitate. "Then we make sure he never gets the chance." Evelyn straightened in her chair. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Noah rested in his crib, breathing softly, while the house around her remained unnervingly quiet. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rush of cars outside, felt amplified, like her senses were finally awake after years of being dulled. She sat at the kitchen table with Julian's folder spread open in front of her, documents neatly aligned, truths laid bare. For the first time, she wasn't reading as a wife. She was reading as a strategist. Julian's words echoed in her mind. Paper remembers. And paper, she was beginning to understand, could also bite back. At 2 a.m, her phone lit up. A text from Nate. "We need to talk tomorrow. You crossed a line last night." Evelyn stared at the message, her pulse steady instead of panicked. Hours ago, those words would have sent her spiraling into apology and self-doubt. Now, they sounded like a man clinging to authority that was already slipping through his fingers. She typed back carefully. "You're right. I'm sorry. I was overwhelmed. We'll talk." The reply came almost instantly. "Good. I don't want this getting out of hand." Evelyn set the phone down. That was the moment she understood the power of letting him believe he was still in control. The next morning, Julian arrived just after sunrise. He didn't bring coffee or comfort. He brought precision. Together, they reviewed every document, every clause Nate had signed without reading. Julian pointed out the flaw Nate never considered: arrogance. "He thought you'd never look back," Julian said. "So he never bothered to lock the door." The contingency clause wasn't flashy. It didn't scream revenge. It sat quietly in the foundation of the company's private financing agreements. If the CEO engaged in behavior that posed reputational or legal risk, authority could be temporarily reassigned to protect investor interests. And Nate had done exactly that. Wire transfers to cover Lila's apartment. Company funds rerouted to private accounts. Text messages that blurred professional boundaries. Enough to trigger concern. Enough to justify action. "What if he suspects something?" Evelyn asked. Julian's lips curved slightly. "Then we let him." That afternoon, Evelyn played her role perfectly. She answered Nate's calls softly. She apologized without groveling. She let her voice tremble just enough to sound unsure. When he told her she needed to stop talking to people outside the marriage, she agreed. When he said stress had made him harsh, she accepted the explanation. Nate relaxed. By evening, he was back at the house, confident, dismissive, already rewriting the narrative in his head. He didn't notice Evelyn watching him, not with fear, but with calculation. He kissed Noah's head distractedly, asked if dinner was ready, complained about a board member who questioned his judgment, and Evelyn listened. Every word, every slip, every confirmation Julian needed. Later that night, when Nate fell asleep beside her, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her heart pounded, not from doubt, but from certainty. The trap wasn't closing loudly. It was closing cleanly. Nate believed his wife was still afraid, still dependent, still blind. He had no idea that the very safeguards he used to build his empire were about to become the reason he lost it. And when it happened, it would be too late to stop. Lila Monroe loved attention the way fire loved oxygen. She sat at the marble-topped bar of a private lounge overlooking the Manhattan skyline, her phone angled just right as city lights spilled behind her like a crown. The glass in her hand caught the glow, champagne bubbling softly as she smiled for the camera. Another story. Another carefully curated moment of luxury. Another reminder to the world that she was winning. She didn't notice the danger yet. Across the city, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed in the darkened bedroom, Noah asleep beside her. Her phone rested face down on the nightstand. She hadn't checked social media in years. Not since Nate told her it was a waste of time. Tonight, she opened it with purpose. Julian's message was short. Look at Lila's stories. All of them. Evelyn tapped the screen. There it was. Lila, draped in silk, laughing into the camera. The caption was playful, smug. Hard work pays off. Evelyn's eyes moved, slow and careful, taking in the details the way she used to analyze risk reports. The view, the angle, the reflection in the mirrored wall behind Lila. Her breath caught. The apartment. She knew that place. Not because she'd ever been there, but because she had seen the paperwork. The lease agreement Nate had sworn was for corporate housing. The one funded through a shell account labeled temporary executive accommodations. The one Julian had flagged as questionable but incomplete. Until now. Evelyn zoomed in. The reflection showed a framed piece of abstract art near the window. She recognized it instantly. It had been listed in the expense report under client staging. The same art. The same address. Her hands were steady as she took screenshots. Another story followed. Lila's phone flashed briefly as she adjusted her grip, and for less than a second, A banking notification slid across the screen. Deposit received. Evelyn paused the video, heart pounding. Julian called immediately. "She's sloppy," he said. "She thinks she's untouchable." "She just confirmed the account," Evelyn replied. "The transfer timing matches." Julian exhaled slowly. That's the missing link. Across town, Lila laughed as comments rolled in. Flames, hearts, envy dripping through emojis. She had no idea that her need to be seen had just handed Evelyn the final piece. At home, Nate texted Evelyn from the guest room downstairs. "Lila's stressed. The media cycle is brutal right now. Don't add to it." Evelyn stared at the message, a strange calm settling over her. She typed back, "I understand. I won't." It wasn't a lie. She wasn't going to add to anything. She was going to end it. Julian compiled the evidence with surgical precision. Screenshots time-stamped, expense reports cross-referenced, wire transfers aligned with public posts, a clean, undeniable pattern of misuse. "This isn't revenge," Julian said quietly over the phone. "This is governance." Evelyn looked down at her sleeping son, his tiny chest rising and falling in peace. Lila thought she was celebrating. Nate thought he was in control. Neither of them realized that the spotlight Lila craved had just exposed everything Nate worked so hard to hide. And once the truth was visible, there was no way to erase it. By the next morning, Evelyn knew exactly what she had to do. She had spent the night replaying Julian's words, reviewing screenshots, organizing timelines in her head the way she once did with risk scenarios. Every instinct told her to move fast. Every lesson survival had taught her told her to slow down. If Nate sensed resistance, he would tighten control. If he sensed fear, he would relax. So Evelyn chose fear. She woke early and made breakfast like nothing had changed. Eggs, toast, coffee brewed exactly the way Nate liked it. When he walked into the kitchen, tie already loosened, phone pressed to his ear, he barely noticed her at first. "Morning," she said softly. He glanced at her, surprised. The edge in his expression dulled. "You look calmer," he said. "I was wrong," Evelyn replied, lowering her eyes. "I shouldn't have gone behind your back. I was scared." Nate exhaled, satisfied. "I told you. Stress does things to you." She nodded, letting silence stretch. When he finished his call, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to fight you," she said. "I don't want lawyers. I just want us to be okay." That was the moment Nate stepped closer. He touched her shoulder, firm, possessive. "That's good," he said, "because if this turns ugly, you won't like the outcome." Her stomach clenched, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she asked the question she knew would loosen his tongue. "Do you really think I'd survive without you?" she asked. Nate smiled. It wasn't kind. "You wouldn't," he said honestly. "You've been out of the game too long. You don't even know how things work anymore." Evelyn swallowed, forcing tears into her eyes. "Then help me," she said. "Tell me what to do." He did. Over dinner that night, Nate talked about the board, about which investors were nervous, about how Lila was a liability but manageable, about which accounts were untouchable and which ones no one ever checks. Evelyn listened. She asked small, harmless questions. She agreed at the right moments. She let him feel powerful. Later, when he went upstairs to take a call, Evelyn slipped her phone from her pocket and typed a single message to Julian. "He's talking. I'm listening." The reply came seconds later. "Good. Let him." That evening, Nate left for the city, confident, careless, already rehearsing the story he would tell if anything went wrong. Evelyn watched his car disappear down the driveway, then locked the door behind him. Only then did she let her knees shake. She sat on the kitchen floor, pressing her hand to her mouth as silent tears spilled down her face. Not from weakness, but from the weight of pretending to be weak. Upstairs, Noah cried softly. Evelyn wiped her face, stood, and went to him. She lifted him gently, holding him close, grounding herself in his warmth. "I know," she whispered. "I know." By the time Nate returned home that night, Evelyn was already 3 steps ahead. Every careless word he had spoken was documented. Every assumption he made about her obedience was catalogued. He thought he had won. He thought she was folding. What he didn't understand was that Evelyn Carter wasn't breaking. She was setting the final stage. At exactly 6:47 p.m., Evelyn locked the nursery door from the inside. Noah slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that grounded her more than any deep breath ever could. She adjusted the baby monitor, kissed his forehead once, and stepped back into the hallway. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt intentional. Evelyn walked into the home office Nate rarely used anymore. The desk was still cluttered with old documents he'd abandoned once everything went digital. She cleared a space, opened her laptop, and waited. At 6:58, her phone vibrated. "Julian, all parties are standing by." Evelyn closed her eyes for 1 second. This was it. At 7 p.m. sharp, the first email went out. Every board member of Brooks Development received the same subject line. Urgent. CEO conduct risk. Immediate review required. Inside was a clean, concise summary. No emotion. No accusations. Just facts. Time-stamped wire transfers. Expense reports tied directly to personal use. Screenshots of public posts aligned perfectly with internal payments. A risk analysis explaining how continued leadership posed legal and reputational danger. At 7:01, the second email followed. Invocation of Emergency Governance Clause. Effective immediately, the clause Evelyn had designed years ago, the one Nate signed without reading, the one that allowed temporary transfer of executive authority to protect the company from collapse. Her name was listed as interim authority holder. Not because she was his wife, because she was legally embedded in the foundation of the company itself. At 7:03, her phone rang. A board member, then another, then another. Evelyn didn't answer. She had already said everything that needed to be said. At 7:05, Julian sent the final message. "It's done. The vote is unanimous." Evelyn sat back in the chair, her hands trembling, not from fear but from release. Years of silence, doubt, and dismissal collapsed into a single, undeniable moment. Across the city, Nate was laughing. He sat in a dimly lit restaurant, his phone face down on the table, Lila leaning close as she talked about an upcoming trip. He had no idea that his access had already been revoked, that his authority was dissolving in real time, that every decision he thought he controlled had just slipped beyond his reach. At 7:12, his phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Again. He frowned and picked it up. The color drained from his face. "What is it?" Lila asked. Nate didn't answer, because at that exact moment, while he sat surrounded by noise and confidence, the empire he believed was untouchable had already moved on without him. Back at home, Evelyn stood and walked to the window. The city lights glowed in the distance, steady and indifferent. She placed one hand over her heart. The trap had closed, and there was no appeal process for arrogance. Nathaniel Brooks woke up irritated before he even opened his eyes. The hotel room smelled faintly of expensive cologne and stale alcohol. His head throbbed, not enough to slow him down, just enough to make him angry. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, already rehearsing the calls he planned to make. Someone at the board had clearly overreacted. A few firm words would put things back in order. They always did. The screen lit up. Face ID failed. Nate frowned and tried again. Access denied. "That's strange," he muttered, sitting up. He entered his passcode manually. The phone unlocked, but his email app refused to load. A red banner appeared instead. Your account has been suspended. Contact System Administrator. His irritation sharpened into unease. He opened his banking app. Nothing loaded. He tried again, this time more aggressively, as if force alone could fix the problem. A single message appeared. This account is no longer authorized. Nate swung his legs off the bed, heart beginning to pound. He opened his contacts and called his assistant. Straight to voicemail. He called the COO. No answer. By the third unanswered call, panic began to creep in. His phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number. This is to formally notify you that as of 7:01 p.m. last night, your executive authority at Brooks Development has been suspended pending investigation. Nate stared at the screen. What the hell is this? He whispered. Another message followed immediately. Please do not attempt to access company systems or property. Security has been instructed accordingly. His breath came faster now. This is insane, he said aloud, grabbing his jacket. They can't do this. I'm the CEO. He didn't bother waking Lila. She stirred anyway as he slammed the door behind him. By the time Nate arrived at the company headquarters, his confidence had hardened into fury. He marched through the lobby, ignoring the curious glances, heading straight for the private elevator. Sir? The security guard said, stepping forward. Nate barely slowed. Move! I'm sorry, the guard replied, firm but calm. Your access badge is inactive. Nate laughed, sharp and disbelieving. That's a mistake. The guard didn't laugh back. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. That was the moment reality struck. This is my building, Nate snapped. I built this company. The guard met his eyes. Not anymore. The words landed like a physical blow. Nate backed away slowly, the lobby suddenly too bright, too public. Phones were out now. Whispers rippled through the space. His name, spoken softly, curious, hungry. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email forwarded by someone who still pitied him enough to send it. Interim executive appointment confirmed Evelyn Carter Brooks, acting chair. Nate's hands began to shake. Evelyn. The woman he had dismissed, threatened, controlled, the woman he thought would never fight back. As Nate stood there, stripped of authority in the place he once ruled, one horrifying truth settled in. This hadn't happened overnight. This had been building for years, and the person who finally pulled the trigger had been standing beside him the entire time. Evelyn arrived at the headquarters just after 9. The building looked the same as it always had, glass and steel rising into the Manhattan sky, polished stone steps, the quiet confidence of money and power. Yet as she stepped out of the car, something was different. People noticed her. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. She adjusted her coat, squared her shoulders, and walked inside. Good morning, Mrs. Brooks, the receptionist said, then hesitated. I mean, Ms. Carter. Evelyn stopped for half a second, then smiled. Miss Carter is fine. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than it ever had, not because she was afraid, but because every floor passing marked a version of herself she had outgrown. The doors opened with a soft chime. The boardroom was already full. Men and women in tailored suits turned toward her, their expressions a mix of curiosity, calculation, and something close to disbelief. These were people who had once walked past her without a second glance, assuming she was only the CEO's quiet wife. Evelyn took the seat at the head of the table. No one stopped her. We'll begin, said the chairman, clearing his throat. As of last night, emergency governance procedures were activated. Ms. Carter has been confirmed as acting chair pending further review. Evelyn felt the weight of the moment press against her chest. She didn't rush to speak. Silence, she had learned, was a form of authority. I won't pretend this is ordinary, she said finally. Her voice was steady. It isn't. but neither is the situation we're facing. She didn't mention Nate by name. She didn't need to. Instead, she laid out the plan, calmly, clearly, without apology. Immediate audit cooperation, investor reassurance, a freeze on non-essential spending, a public statement focused on stability, not scandal. As she spoke, something shifted in the room. Skepticism softened into attention. Attention sharpened into respect. One board member leaned forward. "You prepared this quickly." Evelyn met his gaze. "I've been preparing for a long time," she said. By noon, the announcement was public. Brooks Development appoints interim leadership amid internal review. Evelyn's name sat beneath the headline, "Clean and Undeniable." Down in the lobby, employees gathered in small clusters, whispering as the news spread. Some looked stunned, others looked relieved. A few smiled. At her new office, Evelyn paused before entering. The nameplate had already been changed. Evelyn Carter, acting chair. She ran her fingers lightly over the letters, not with triumph, but with quiet acknowledgement. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. Her phone buzzed with a message from Julian. "You did well. The board trusts you." She looked out over the city through the wide glass windows, sunlight spilling across the desk Nate once occupied. Somewhere in that city, a man was realizing what it meant to lose control. Evelyn placed her bag down, sat in the chair, and opened the first file. For the first time, the company was in the hands of the person who had actually built it. And this time, she wasn't going to disappear. The fallout didn't come quietly. By mid-afternoon, the phones at Brooks Development rang without pause. Reporters, analysts, investors. Every financial outlet wanted a statement, a quote, a hint of scandal they could sharpen into a headline. Evelyn let the communications team handle it. Silence, she knew, made people listen harder when you finally spoke. Across the city, Nathaniel Brooks sat alone in his car, parked illegally outside a cafe he couldn't afford anymore. His phone buzzed non-stop, but the names lighting up the screen weren't friends. They were creditors, lawyers, people who suddenly remembered every promise he'd broken. One message came through that made his stomach drop. Lila Monroe has been terminated effective immediately. NDA enforcement in progress. He stared at the words, then laughed once, bitter and disbelieving. She wouldn't leave him. She couldn't. Not after everything. He called her, straight to voicemail. At the same time, Lila was standing in a glass-walled conference room, her designer heels abandoned beside the table, mascara streaked down her face. Across from her sat two attorneys and a representative from Human Resources. "This isn't personal," one of them said calmly. "Your employment was contingent on compliance. The evidence is clear." "You can't do this," Lila snapped. "Nathan promised—" "Nathaniel Brooks has no authority here," the attorney interrupted, "and he hasn't since last night." The room went quiet. Lila's world collapsed in layers. First the job, then the apartment, frozen pending investigation. Then the realization that every luxury she enjoyed had been rented on borrowed time. Back at headquarters, Evelyn reviewed the final compliance report with steady focus. Every misuse of funds had been traced, every irregularity documented. There was no rage in her movements, no satisfaction in watching names fall from the system. Only inevitability. A junior executive hesitated before speaking. "Miss Carter, what about Mr. Brooks?" Evelyn didn't look up. "He'll be treated fairly," she said. "According to the law. Nothing more. Nothing less." That evening, Nate finally forced his way into her presence, cornering her in the lobby as she prepared to leave. His suit was wrinkled now, his confidence fractured. "You planned this," he said hoarsely. "All of it." Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "You planned it," she replied. "I just stopped covering for you." "You ruined me," he hissed. She shook her head. You did that the night you chose yourself over your child. The words landed hard. Security stepped closer, but Evelyn raised a hand. It's fine. She leaned in just enough for him to hear. This is the consequence, she said quietly. Not revenge. Consequence. Nate had no response. No leverage left, no audience. As Evelyn walked away, the building doors closing behind her, she felt something loosen inside her chest. The weight she had carried for years, fear, doubt, obedience, finally fell away. Justice didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived methodically. And for the first time, Evelyn went home knowing the people who tried to erase her were now facing a world that would never forget what they'd done. Nathaniel Brooks showed up at the house just after midnight. Evelyn heard the front door before she saw him. The sharp slam echoed through the hallway, followed by uneven footsteps that didn't belong to the man who once moved through the world with effortless confidence. She stood in the living room, lights low, Noah sleeping upstairs, her posture calm and unmoving. Nate stopped when he saw her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His tie was gone. His jacket hung crooked on his shoulders. The man in front of her looked smaller somehow, like authority had been stripped from his bones along with his title. You did this, he said finally, his voice hoarse. You planned it behind my back. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. I responded, she said. There's a difference. He laughed, a broken sound. You don't even know what you've done. The board turned on me. Investors won't take my calls. My accounts are frozen. He stepped closer. You could fix this. You still can. She folded her arms slowly. Why would I? For our family, Nate said quickly. For Noah. You think this won't affect him? Evelyn felt the familiar pull of guilt try to surface. She shut it down. You didn't think about Noah when you left him gasping for air, she said evenly. Don't use him now. Nate's face tightened. I was under pressure. You don't understand what it's like to carry that kind of responsibility. I carried it, Evelyn replied. You just took credit for it. That stopped him. He searched her face, as if looking for the woman who used to doubt herself. She wasn't there anymore. His voice softened, shifting tactics. I made mistakes, I admit that, but we're married. This is something we handle privately. Evelyn shook her head. You made choices, repeatedly. And you threatened me when I protected our child. That was a misunderstanding, he said quickly. I was trying to keep things stable. Stable for you, she corrected. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Then Nate did something she had never seen before. He dropped his gaze. I don't know who I am without the company, he admitted quietly. I don't know what to do. For a brief moment, Evelyn felt the echo of the woman she used to be, the one who would have rushed to reassure him, to soften the fall. Instead, she felt something steadier. That's not my responsibility anymore, she said. He looked up, panic flickering in his eyes. You're really going to do this? Destroy me? Evelyn met his gaze, unwavering. No, Nate. I'm letting the consequences finish what your choices started. She stepped aside and opened the front door. You should leave, she said. Our lawyers will handle the rest. Nate hesitated, as if waiting for her to stop him. She didn't. When the door closed behind him, the house fell silent again. Evelyn stood there for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. Upstairs, Noah stirred. Evelyn turned toward the staircase, her heart steady, knowing one chapter had ended for good. The days after Nate left felt unreal, as if Evelyn had stepped into a life that belonged to someone else. Mornings began early. Noah woke before sunrise, his small cries echoing softly through the house. Evelyn learned the rhythm of his needs again, not in panic this time, but with presence, feeding, rocking, holding him, until his body relaxed against hers. Each simple act stitched something back together inside her. The house was quieter now, no slammed doors. No sharp comments drifting down hallways. Just space. And space, she discovered, could be healing or terrifying, depending on how honestly you faced it. Evelyn began seeing a therapist 3 times a week, not because anyone forced her to, because she needed to untangle years of being told she was too sensitive, too emotional, too much. The sessions were exhausting. Some days she left feeling lighter. Other days she sat in her car afterward and cried until her chest hurt. But she kept going. At work, she was careful not to rush transformation. She listened more than she spoke. She asked questions, reviewed reports, learned which departments had been quietly drowning under Nate's pressure. People were cautious around her at first, unsure whether her power would look like his. It didn't. She set boundaries. She delegated. She went home at reasonable hours. At night, after Noah slept, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, not to strategize, but to remember. Old files, old notebooks, work she had loved once. She felt pieces of herself return slowly, cautiously, like animals stepping back into open ground. One evening, Julian stopped by to drop off finalized paperwork. He didn't stay long. He never pushed. That, too, mattered. "You don't have to prove anything right now," he told her quietly as he stood near the door. "Stability is an achievement." Evelyn nodded. She understood that now. A letter arrived a week later, handwritten, from a board member who had once ignored her completely. "Thank you for restoring integrity," it read. "We didn't know how badly we needed it." She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not for validation, but for perspective. The healing wasn't dramatic. There were no grand speeches, no sudden joy. There were moments, though. The first time Noah laughed in his sleep. The first full night she slept without waking in fear. The first time she looked in the mirror and didn't feel small. Late one night, rocking Noah by the window, Evelyn whispered a promise she had been afraid to say out loud before. "We're safe," she told him. "I've got you." And for the first time, she believed it. This chapter wasn't about victory. It was about becoming whole again. Evelyn didn't expect tenderness to return first. She thought strength would come before anything else. Confidence, control, the solid armor she had been building piece by piece. But instead, it was something quieter that surprised her. Something she hadn't invited, and definitely hadn't prepared for. It started with Julian, not in a dramatic way, not with declarations or sudden closeness, just presence. He began stopping by the office once or twice a week, always with a clear purpose. Contracts to review, updates from compliance. A quick question that could have been sent by email but wasn't. He never stayed long, never crossed a line. He treated her not like a woman who had been rescued, but like a professional who had earned her seat. That mattered more than she wanted to admit. One evening, a storm rolled in unexpectedly, rain streaking down the office windows as the city darkened earlier than usual. Evelyn was still at her desk when Julian knocked lightly on the open door. "You missed dinner," he said, glancing at the clock. "Again." She smiled faintly. Old habits. He didn't lecture her. He simply set a paper bag on the desk. Soup. Nothing fancy. They ate in silence at first, the sound of rain filling the room. Evelyn realized how rare it was to sit with someone who didn't demand anything from her. No reassurance, no submission, no performance. "You don't have to stay late every night," Julian said eventually. "The company won't fall apart if you rest." She looked at him. "I'm not afraid it will." That surprised him. "Then why do you?" Evelyn thought for a moment. "Because for a long time, if I stopped, everything did." Julian nodded. He didn't argue. He understood. The shift was subtle after that. Conversations drifted beyond work. He asked about Noah, never prying, never possessive. He listened when she spoke about therapy, about rebuilding trust in her own judgment. When she hesitated, he waited. One night, as they walked out of the building together, Evelyn realized she felt calm beside him. Not excited, not anxious, just steady. The realization scared her more than anger ever had. She had built her life on vigilance, on anticipating danger, on bracing for disappointment. Calm felt unfamiliar, suspicious. At home, rocking Noah to sleep, she caught herself thinking about the way Julian had looked at her earlier, not with expectation, but with quiet respect. It made her chest ache in a way she couldn't name. She didn't want to fall into something just because it was safe. She wanted it to be real. A few days later, Julian said, "I'm stepping back a bit." Evelyn blinked. "Why?" "Because you don't need me hovering," he replied honestly. "And because if anything else ever grows here, it should be because you choose it. Not because I was convenient." The words landed gently, but firmly. Evelyn watched him leave, heart unexpectedly heavy. That night, she admitted the truth to herself for the first time. She wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. She was afraid of wanting something again. The envelope arrived on a Thursday afternoon, slipped quietly under Evelyn's office door. No courier announcement, no email notification. Just thick, cream-colored paper with her name typed neatly across the front. Evelyn Carter, not Brooks. She noticed that detail immediately. Names mattered now. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she finished the call she was on, answered 2 emails, and took a slow breath before breaking the seal. Something about the weight of the envelope told her this wasn't routine. Inside was a single document. Old, carefully preserved. A marital agreement. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she scanned the first page. Her eyes moved faster with each line, disbelief sharpening into clarity. It wasn't just a prenup. It was a hybrid contract, financial, corporate, and personal, drafted years ago, back when she still insisted on safeguards just in case. And there it was. The clause. If one spouse engaged in financial misconduct that threatened shared assets or dependents, the injured party retained full control over jointly influenced holdings, including corporate interests derived from shared intellectual contribution. Evelyn sat back slowly. She remembered the night she wrote this. Pregnant. Tired. Nate had laughed, kissed her forehead, told her she worried too much. Then he signed it without reading, eager to get back to a call. She turned to the last page. Nathaniel Brooks's signature was there, clear, undeniable. A handwritten note was clipped to the document. He tried to destroy this copy during the divorce prep. He missed one. H.G. Harriet Gable. Evelyn closed her eyes. So that was it. Nate hadn't just underestimated her strength. He had underestimated her foresight. Even back then, when she still loved him, she had known, some part of her had known, that protection wasn't pessimism, it was wisdom. Her phone rang. Julian. "You got it," he said, not asking. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "He never thought I'd remember." Julian exhaled softly. "That document makes everything irreversible." "I don't want him destroyed," Evelyn said quietly. "I just want it finished." "And it will be," Julian replied, "on your terms." That evening, Nate's attorney requested an emergency meeting. By the end of it, the tone had shifted completely. No more threats, no more bluster, just resignation. Nate had tried to erase her legally, financially, emotionally, and yet the very framework he used to cage her had been designed by her hands. When Evelyn left the meeting, she didn't feel triumph. She felt free. Outside, dusk settled over the city, softening the edges of steel and glass. Evelyn stood for a moment, letting the cool air fill her lungs. Some battles weren't won by fighting harder. They were won by remembering who you were before someone convinced you to forget. And Nathaniel Brooks was finally learning the cost of assuming she never would. Nathaniel Brooks learned what silence really sounded like when no one returned his calls. Days passed, then weeks. The phone that once buzzed constantly now lay still on his kitchen counter, its screen dark, its importance gone. The apartment he'd moved into after being forced out of the house felt temporary in the worst way. Bare walls, rented furniture, the faint echo of a life that no longer fit him. He sold things first. The watch he once flashed at galas, the car he didn't need anymore, then the smaller things he never thought about until they were gone. None of it was enough. The investigation moved forward methodically. Accounts were audited, deals were reviewed, names were quietly removed from future projects. Nate wasn't charged with anything dramatic. No handcuffs, no headlines screaming fraud, just something far worse: irrelevance. At Brooks' development, his name stopped being mentioned entirely. New leadership stabilized operations, investors returned, employees stopped whispering and started working again. The company didn't collapse without him. It improved. Nate noticed the shift one afternoon when he walked past the building and saw a banner hanging in the lobby announcing a sustainability initiative, one he remembered mocking years ago. People smiled as they entered. There was no tension in the air, no fear. That night, he searched Evelyn's name online. Articles described her as measured, strategic, unexpectedly effective. Interviews praised her transparency, her focus on long-term stability, her refusal to sensationalize the transition. She never mentioned him. That hurt more than any accusation ever could. Meanwhile, Lila Monroe's fall was faster and uglier. Without Nate's protection, the industry closed ranks. Agencies declined her calls. Former friends distanced themselves. The apartment she flaunted was reclaimed. The photos disappeared from her feed one by one, replaced by vague quotes about betrayal and survival. No one listened. Evelyn heard about all of this secondhand. She never asked. She didn't need to. Consequences, she had learned, didn't require supervision. One evening, she received a message from Nate. Just one line. "I never thought you'd go this far." Evelyn stared at it for a long moment before typing a response. "I didn't go far. I stopped standing still." She blocked the number. At home, Noah giggled as she lifted him into the air, his laughter filling the room with something bright and real. Evelyn held him close, breathing in the warmth of him, the steady proof that life continued beyond betrayal. The world hadn't ended. It had corrected itself. Nate would spend years telling himself a different story, one where he was wronged. One where power was stolen instead of forfeited. Evelyn knew that too, but she also knew this. Some people lose everything because they refuse to see the truth. Others gain everything because they finally do. And as the last traces of Nathaniel Brooks faded quietly into the background, Evelyn felt no triumph, only peace. Evelyn didn't measure her success by headlines anymore. She measured it in quieter moments. Mornings that began without dread. Meetings that ended without intimidation. Evenings spent barefoot on the living room floor, Noah crawling clumsily toward her with determined joy. The company was steady now. Profitable, respected, boring in the best possible way. Investors trusted the numbers. Employees trusted leadership. For the first time in years, Evelyn trusted herself. One afternoon, after a long board meeting, she found Julian waiting in her office doorway. He hadn't been there in weeks. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. She smiled. "You never do." They walked together, not to a restaurant or some dramatic celebration, but to a quiet park a few blocks away. Noah slept in his stroller, sunlight filtering through the trees above them. For a while, neither of them spoke. "I've been thinking," Julian said eventually, stopping near a bench. "About timing and choice." Evelyn turned toward him, curious but cautious. I didn't step back because I lost interest, he continued. I stepped back because I wanted to be sure that if you ever leaned toward me, it wouldn't be out of fear or gratitude. Her throat tightened. And now? She asked. Julian met her gaze. Now I see someone who doesn't need anyone to survive. Evelyn looked down at Noah, then back at him. I don't, she said. But I want something again. That's different. The admission felt risky, liberating, real. Julian nodded slowly. That's all I ever hoped to hear. They didn't kiss, not then. They sat on the bench and watched Noah sleep, sharing a silence that felt full instead of fragile. Weeks passed. Life continued. And one evening, after a long day, Julian showed up at her door holding a small velvet box, not with urgency, not with expectation. I don't need an answer today, he said simply, or tomorrow, or ever, if that's not your path. Evelyn opened the box. Inside wasn't something flashy, no oversized stone, just something elegant, thoughtful, intentional. She closed the box gently and looked up at him. I spent years being chosen last, she said. I won't do that again. Julian nodded. I know. She smiled, emotion rising unexpectedly. That's why I choose you. The decision felt calm, grounded, earned. Later that night, Evelyn lay beside Noah's crib, watching him sleep, her hand resting over her heart. She thought about the life she had lost, and the one she had built in its place. She hadn't been rewarded with revenge. She had been rewarded with safety, with respect, with love that didn't require her to disappear. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. The wedding was small, exactly the way Evelyn wanted it. No press, no spectacle, no reminders of the world that once tried to break her. Just a quiet afternoon at a restored coastal estate overlooking the water, sunlight dancing across white chairs, a soft breeze carrying the sound of waves. Friends stood close. Colleagues who had become family smiled from the back rows, and in Evelyn's arms, Noah gurgled happily, blissfully unaware of how much had led to this moment. Evelyn didn't walk down the aisle feeling rescued. She walked with her head high, steady, certain. Julian waited for her without impatience, his expression calm and open. Not ownership, not expectation, only choice. When their eyes met, Evelyn felt something settle inside her, an understanding that this life wasn't a replacement for the one she lost. It was better because it was honest. Their vows were simple. Julian promised partnership, not protection. Evelyn promised truth, not sacrifice. When they said, I do, there were no cheers, only warm applause and quiet smiles, the kind that came from people who knew the whole story and respected the ending. Later, as guests drifted toward dinner, Evelyn stepped away for a moment, carrying Noah toward the edge of the terrace. The horizon stretched endlessly in front of her, blue meeting blue, the future wide and unthreatening. She thought of the woman she had been, the woman who begged, the woman who doubted herself, the woman who was told, "It's just a baby." That version of her felt distant now, not erased, but honored. She had survived so this one could exist. Julian joined her, resting a hand lightly at her back. "You okay?" he asked. Evelyn smiled. "More than okay." Across the city, in a much smaller apartment, Nathaniel Brooks watched a muted television as a business segment played in the background. A familiar company logo flashed briefly on the screen, followed by Evelyn's name mentioned in passing, praised for long-term stability, ethical leadership, and vision. He turned the volume down. The world had moved on, and it hadn't asked for his permission. Back at the reception, laughter filled the air. Noah clapped his hands at the sound. Evelyn kissed his hair and whispered, "We made it." That night, When the last guest had gone and the lights dimmed, Evelyn stood by the window of her new home, watching the moon reflect across the water. She didn't feel victorious. She felt complete. Some people call it revenge when a woman rises after being betrayed, but Evelyn knew better. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. This was growth. This was love earned without fear. And as she turned away from the window, toward the life she had chosen, one truth echoed clearly in her heart. She hadn't taken anything from anyone. She had simply stopped giving herself away. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with us right now, that tells me something important. Something in this journey touched your heart in a quiet, personal way. Maybe it reminded you that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, just hold on a little longer. Maybe it showed you that walking away isn't failure when staying means losing yourself. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Evelyn didn't change the world by screaming. She changed it by choosing clarity over fear. This story is a reminder that dignity is not something we're given by others. It's something we reclaim. Healing doesn't come from revenge, but from alignment, when your actions finally match your worth. Or, as Epictetus said, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. That's what true healing looks like. If you're in a season where you feel unseen, unheard, or underestimated, remember this. Your quiet resolve may be shaping a future you can't see yet. Stay steady. Stay awake to yourself. And if this story spoke to you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It helps us reach others who might need this reminder today. You're not alone, and you're stronger than you think.